Thank you. So I'm joined here by McChord, who's the CEO of Datto, the data protection startup. And I wanted to ask, first of all, you were saying to me that you never interviewed for a job. You left college.
That is true, yeah.
And you decided to go and start a startup. And you came not out here, but to Connecticut.
Yeah, no, it's not exactly the world's most inspiring story. I was actually a terrible student in college. I graduated with a 2.2 GPA, and I was certain that absolutely no one would hire me. So my thinking was that I would start a business, almost certainly fail at it, but then I would have something on my resume besides my GPA to put there. And so, yeah, when I was looking for grand locations to start this business that would be a certain failure, I thought, what better than my parents' house, which happened to be located in Connecticut, and the rent was also free.
And instead it became, is it Connecticut's only tech unicorn?
It is Connecticut's only tech unicorn.
Well, congratulations.
Yes, I'm sure Connecticut is super proud that that's its origin story.
And so, I mean, what is you may not know because you're not based out here, but what are the advantages and disadvantages of basing a startup outside of Silicon Valley?
So I have the experience of one, so it is not, super nuanced.
But you're going to move here next, yeah?
Absolutely not, no. I may not live in Connecticut, but I don't think Silicon Valley is for me. Actually, what we've found is that you can attract great talent pretty much anywhere, and the talent sticks around. We like being a big fish in a small pond, and that's worked out well that people aren't looking to go, some other place. And you really get a bigger sense of community and family that people are invested in. And this is not a 2-year engagement to get some options and move on to the next best thing, but instead, how do I actually make this whole thing work? And I think that's part of the reason why we've been successful. And I certainly think that if I was in Silicon Valley, there's so many cool, exciting, amazing, awesome things going on that I personally would have been distracted. I know our early team, we almost failed a zillion times, and we would have been distracted and said, go do something else. But since we were in Connecticut, we had no other options but to stick it out.
You make Connecticut sound like a prison. Okay, but I also hear that you, as well as almost failing almost a gazillion times, you also almost got bought a gazillion times. And
a few times, but yeah.
And you finally sold, closing the deal last week, so congratulations.
Thank you.
To Vista Equity Partners, the
Yes.
PE firm. So what made you want to sell to them when you didn't sell to all the other people?
So it was interesting, and these things happened at different times, and it's kind of fascinating sort of how a company goes through a journey. And so for us, started the company, there are not a lot of VCs in Connecticut, and nobody invested in us. So our initial seed round came from running up credit card debt, and I ran up $80,000 worth of credit card debt. The very first offer to buy the company came about 6 years in, and at that stage we were profitable, growing very quickly, and they offered to buy the company for $100 million. At the time, I owned 100% of the business because I did not know how to give anyone stock options. So instead they were like, well, we had a really good year, what are you going to do? And I was like, I don't know, go to the car dealership, pick out something you want, and it's yours. That's what I did for our management team. Also, only in Connecticut, I think, could you get away with that. I don't know how to give you stock options, so you don't get them. But yeah, so along the way, after that, and got that offer, I ended up turning it down because the company loved our technology but didn't actually really love Connecticut, the team that we had built, any of those pieces. And so, yeah, it just didn't seem like a very good outcome for my team, and so I turned them down. Ended up taking some actual VC investment after that because I was like, oh crap, this thing's actually valuable. I need to not screw this up. I need to not make that the worst decision of my life. And so got an investment from General Catalyst in 2013. They're a Boston-based VC firm. And then got an investment from TCV in 2015. And earlier this year, we were going down the road of getting ready to go public because that was sort of the next step in the grand manifest destiny, it feels like, of all companies. And what we found is that our product and technology we sell to a pretty specific niche. And this allows us to have an incredibly efficient go-to-market and enable the company to be super successful.
What is this niche?
It's the managed service provider market. These MSPs that do IT services for small business. And the public market investors did not understand or know what this was. And they had asked questions like, well, won't Amazon just do your business? Or like, how do you compete with Google? And I was just like, no, this is like not what we do. And so, which by the way, what we do is data backup disaster recovery for small businesses. But yeah, so that just seemed like a really tough road. And in the meantime, there are a bunch of incredibly smart PE firms out there, and had a conversation with the folks at Vista, and they understood our market. And they got our thesis that essentially every small business around the world that's sub 1,000 seats is going to eventually need a managed service provider to fill the role of CIO. And that we are one of the largest companies that sells through MSPs to reach a market, and that there's just tremendous opportunity for us to take these relationships and leverage it into something. And they got it. And that was like the first time just talking to anybody who actually got it. And so the idea of essentially having anybody's money or really smart targeted money behind where you're going, it just made so much more sense to sort of have that targeted money.
And Vista is one of these new generation of PE firms that are focusing very much on software companies, very efficient, and in fact actually often looking outside of the valley for deals because of the lower costs. What kind of opportunities can they give you next? And are they just kind of going to stick with you for a couple of years and then you're going to IPO?
So we closed the deal last week, so the exit strategy, I don't like have a grand answer immediately. I think they bring a lot of expertise to the table. They have a lot of experience and connections that are certainly valuable. We look at them the same way that we were super selective around picking our VC firms that invested in the company. The same was true when looking at a whole bunch of different PE firms, and Vista has a lot of expertise, a lot of understanding, and so we think that we can really leverage that because for us, we're constantly trying to get better.
Your complaint about public market investors is not an uncommon one.
Yep.
People often worry that the investors don't get their product, even much simpler products like Snapchat. Do you ever think about how you could educate them better?
I think so, and like we looked at that, but it's also a big part of how do you want to spend your time. And convincing public market investors that our market is real doesn't really sound like where I want to put my time right now. And I'm far more interested in building awesome technology, building the business, growing what we have, than sort of making the perpetual sales pitch for your existence.
Yeah, I can see that. So one issue that is presumably facing a huge number of your customers at the moment, and maybe facing some of the startup founders in the audience, is the dreaded four-letter word of the Gdpr, which is the European General Data Protection Regulation coming out next year, which sounds incredibly boring and is actually slightly frightening. If you break the rules, what's the penalties?
They're not good. They're pretty extreme, actually.
So the rules cover anyone that has any European customers, so they can be companies based in the US, and they include, I think the penalty is 4% of global revenue as a fine, or $20 million, whichever is larger. So what do you advise your customers to do about this, and what's kind of the biggest issue if you're trying to protect data and make sure you don't run afoul of these rules?
So I think for us, we look at it that there's just tremendous scope. And GDPR is really, really wide, and we fall into a category known as a controller inside there, which means that we're responsible for the data and basically making decisions about it rather than just asking a downstream provider to hold it. And in that case, it gets really interesting because the law doesn't have enough nuance to really understand that there's so many different businesses that fall into this. And there's a bunch of pieces that get us worried or really scratch our heads as we start to think about it. So for example, like right to be forgotten is included. And that means that in theory, somebody could ask and say, well, so-and-so, their personal information ended up in the data that you protected, and now we need it removed. And like our technology is entirely based around not losing information, ensuring that its integrity is there all the time. And the idea that you could go back and like modify the past is not a feature that we built out or intend to implement. So things like that become really hard, and unfortunately a lot of this is probably still needs to be tested out through case law, and that people are going to go to trial and you'll find out, because that's sort of what happens with all these laws. And I think that in our case, we're lucky because our company's not small, and that we can hire some really smart people to look at how best to apply this and say, this is the reasoning why we think this fits in your case, which appears to be what the majority of sort of our competition of similar size is doing. And that's all we really can do until there's like better case law and better clarity about it. And in our case is special because it's such a wide swath that we collect.
Yeah, yeah. And right to be forgotten is really interesting, right? So I can go to you either as a customer or an employee, and I can say, please delete anything to do with me. Now, what I don't understand is how does that contradict with other laws? Because normally people want to keep stuff in case they get sued, right? Right.
Well, so absolutely that's huge. But then a second thing, like you just look at, if I protect a machine that has a spreadsheet and that spreadsheet has the salaries of all the employees and you want it deleted, this particular employee, like how do you do that when I don't own the license actually for the application to open the spreadsheet? I know I have the data, so like it does apply to me. Like you run into these weird cases where it's like this technical infeasibility, but you know that you're sitting on it. And so it gets very complicated, and then plus if you just wipe that information from the spreadsheet, that could have cascading effects that, you did need to know the sum total of payroll that was actually calculated by that. So there's just not enough nuance to capture all the different ways that companies end up retaining personally identifiable information.
Mm. And so 2018 will definitely be the year of people trying to get their head around GDPR. Probably too late, given it comes in May.
Yep.
2017 was the year of ransomware.
Yes.
Which took over huge numbers of individuals and small businesses, and in fact large businesses. Have you seen a rise in demand because people are panicking about ransomware taking down their systems?
Absolutely. Ransomware has been an enormous driver for us, and it's actually been kind of fascinating how what starts out as like a customer support call and then becomes a common ticket, next thing you know becomes a piece of IP that we have to like rapidly restore people from ransomware. This stuff is an absolute epidemic at the SMB level, and people are getting hit all the time. The issue is that the ransomware software is actually like not stupid. And we'll go out there and it'll do all kinds of stuff. We've seen variants that will actually evaluate the files that exist on a person's machine and be like, oh, look, these are medical records. Your ransom's 20K. Oh, look, it's Word docs. It's $500. And it'll like actively make those choices. We've seen ransomware that includes live chat customer support to help you buy the Bitcoin to pay it off. All these things, it's your friendly ransom customer support agent to like assist you through the process of opening your Coinbase account.
It's kind of amazing to think of the people that go to the office every day to do that, right?
Right, but it's such an asymmetric threat because here's the average small business owner that, they get hit with some malicious Google Docs link or something like that. It sits dormant on their machine for 3 days. Next thing you know, they wake up and every document of value has been encrypted, and they've got, the little saw guy on a bicycle going, I have all your data. You have 72 hours. And people freak out. And so in our case, we're the final safety net. And so obviously it's our goal to like prevent people from having to pay their ransomware, but you do have to protect yourself in advance.
And there are strains that try to go after backups as well. Have you guys experienced that?
So they're out there, but they don't affect us because the way that the backups are stored in our system, they can't be exposed from the machine that's actually being protected.
And so then the other kind of interesting thing about your experience as an entrepreneur, shows that Connecticut isn't that boring, is that you were responsible for handing over Hillary Clinton's emails.
So this is one of the benefits of a channel sales model, in that you don't always know who your customers are. And in our case, we work with lots of managed service providers. Platte River Networks, which was in the news, happens to be a managed service provider. And they made a choice, which I will not opine on, to use our product to protect a certain extremely famous Secretary of State. And I've got to manage my words carefully through this. But and so they did that. And then we actually got faced with a really interesting set of decisions because when we realized that this was occurring, we actually read about it in the New York Times, and I saw Platte River Networks. I was like, oh man, that name sounds familiar. And
I'm
so
just thinking-
I go and like I log into the customer database and I'm like, uh-oh, they're a customer. Then I go like through the devices and there was one of something, I don't remember the exact name, it was like ClintServe01. And it's like immediately like general counsel,
Really
like,
clever
we have a
naming,
problem. So we knew that we had this information and we badly, badly didn't want it. So like we're really good. Like if you're a dentist office or something, like I've got you down, our security is awesome, but like nation state level is a different, like we don't bill at that rate. And so, yeah, we just were not prepared in that sense. And so we were like, oh my God, we have this information and no one knows but us right now. And so it was a very delicate process, but actually pretty amazingly, we were able to actually reach out to Platte River, sort of be like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we think we have something that we don't want to have. And can you reach out to your client? And actually, because this was the part that we were worried about, like having to go to battle and say, no, we cannot turn this information over. This is not ours to turn over. The client actually approved to have the information turned over to the FBI.
The client being the very famous Secretary of State.
Yes.
Okay.
So in that case, like it was okay, but then it was this crazy race against the press because we got a letter from the House Science and Technology Committee, like all these things were starting to happen, and we realized like we really, really, really did not want this data. And so ended up having to send somebody to the data center at like 3:30 in the morning to unrack some servers and drive them in the back of their car like down to Virginia to like hand over with lawyers present to the appropriate folks. And it was
But you didn't have to do that yourself?
No.
But you did almost have to testify in front of Congress?
I did. So that came up that we were very close to potentially having to testify in front of a subcommittee in Congress, and I was going to have to do it. And I had like read all the briefing stuff, and it was tough because the other people on the panel were probably going to plead the fifth. And I was not, because we didn't do anything wrong. But it was their objective to make me look as terrible as possible. So it was not good. But I had like the dubious honor of like I got to go to like Brooks Brothers and be like, I need a suit to testify in front of Congress. And they're like, when? And I was like, I have 48 hours. Is there a tailor here? And so they procured said suit. But
you know you can get them off the rack, right?
I know, but it's the ultimate like power suit of like, oh my God, what am I getting into? So yeah, no, so that was an event, but we got down to like less than 12 hours, and I got the call that I didn't have to do it, which actually at the time I was like deeply disappointed because I was like, I'm ready, bring it. I had done all this prep, like it was just ready to go. So yeah.
Well, I wish you'd worn the suit, but
I have the shoes. These are actually the shoes from the suit. So there you go.
The famous shoes. All right.
I don't think so.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to have to play underrated or overrated.
Oh boy,
I'm
well,
going
you're
to do my turn as a game show host.
Yeah, you'll be able to figure out I'm not from Silicon Valley pretty fast.
Okay, Bitcoin.
Overrated.
Blockchain.
Overrated.
AI.
Overrated.
Facebook.
I feel like it's about on par.
What? Because it's been taking a bashing all year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Google.
I think underrated.
Autonomous cars.
Overrated.
The FBI.
Underrated.
Cloud computing.
Overrated.
Amazon.
Underrated.
Data security.
Always underrated.
And because that was such a crap last one, I'm going to add Hillary Clinton.
Oh. Ask my lawyer.
And the next speaker is his lawyer. No. Okay, thank you very much for your time. And next I'm going to introduce Sarah Fryer of Bloomberg.
Thank you all very much.